I know what you're probably thinking. Hey, buddy, I'm in this course to learn Node and to write some JavaScript. Well, we're on the way, and in this, our next major section, we'll actually start to write some code in Node. This section is the Node core. For our first lecture, we'll have a conceptual aside. And in this aside, we'll talk for a moment about servers and clients. We've already said several times that Node.js is a server technology. It's designed to be able to use JavaScript to write server code. So what do we mean by that? By server and client? Well, at its most basic, a server is a computer that is performing services. It's just a computer, and it's performing jobs that are requested of it. The client asks for those services, and the client may also do some work, but the server does the heavier, deeper amount of work. So the client makes a request for a service, for some work to be performed, and the server responds with perhaps verification that the work has been performed, or error messages, or data, or other things. And that request is in some standard format that both the client and the server are programmed to understand. And so is the response, also a standard format that both the client and the server are programmed to understand. So both the client and the server are computers. In fact, they may be the same computer in some circumstances. But the client is asking for the work to be done, and the server is doing the work. This is called the client-server model of computing. Now, this standard model of request and response in a standard format between client and server exists in one of the most popular means of using this model, that is the internet. So we are used to talking about a web server, that is a computer connected to the internet that is accepting requests for work or data and is then providing responses. The usual client is the internet browser, like Google Chrome or Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Safari. And they communicate with a request and a response for that work to be done for those services. And the standard format that on the internet is called HTTP. There's an HTTP request and an HTTP response. Now we'll talk about that a little bit later in the course. For now, though, we're going to focus on the programming language that we use when writing web software on the client and on the server, that is the internet browser or the web server. If you've done any kind of front-end web development, meaning coding in the browser, we use HTML and CSS for laying out our information and our web page, but if you've done any coding, you've likely done it in JavaScript, because that is the language that the browsers have standardized on. Browsers like Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Internet Explorer, Edge, they implement a JavaScript engine of some kind so that we can code in JavaScript. Now, Google Chrome, for example, is a C++ program. It embeds V8, and it makes extra features available to JavaScript within the Google Chrome browser. For example, if you've done with JavaScript, maybe using the jQuery JavaScript library, editing DOM elements, that is, the HTML elements after they've been pulled into memory, editing the contents of the web page dynamically, or perhaps using AJAX in the XML HTTP request object. If you've done any of those kinds of things, you've done something that's outside the ECMAScript specification. If you look for DOM manipulation, you won't find it in the ECMAScript standard. There's nothing about editing a web page. But those features are made available to JavaScript by, in this case that we're talking about, the Google Chrome C++ program, that is the browser. So this idea of giving JavaScript more features already exists. If you've done any JavaScript coding in the browser, you're already using this idea of features that don't by default exist in JavaScript, but that are made available through JavaScript for you to do work. Now, that said, the work that we're doing is client work and requesting services, requesting data from the web server. Many times in real-world environments and real companies, you might have to do more than just one side of this coding work. Not just the browser, not just the web server, but both. So you may have been using PHP or C# if you were using ASP.NET, or Ruby if you're using Ruby on Rails, or other programming languages that are used within particular web server technologies. So you had to switch back and forth between two different programming languages at least in order to get your work done. But the goal here with Node.js is instead to write JavaScript on the web server. So the web server still needs to do all these jobs and work, and just like the browser, we're going to use JavaScript. So you only need one programming language in your tool belt while you're building your software. And just like the browser, we can add on features to JavaScript, make available features to JavaScript that are useful for the work that needs to be done. For the browser, things like manipulating the DOM, manipulating the elements that appear on the web page, for example. On the web server, there's other things that need doing. Now, this isn't the only reason why Node.js exists, to write server code in JavaScript, but it is a really great benefit that you can actually share libraries of code between the browser and the web server, and that you and any others that work on whatever project you're working on only need to worry about one programming language the entire time that you're writing code. All right, so this is clients and servers. Let's talk more specifically about Node.js.